Our lunchtime chat is going to be between Bob and Andy's going to do a little bit of interviewing. He's going to talk about what are these books. I'm sorry, I was too old to actually have been introduced to these books as a child.
Glory Gardens.
Glory Gardens. I'll hand over to you, Andy. You can take it from here, I think.
Yes, yeah, thank you. So, we're going to talk Glory Gardens and also going to talk about First 11, which is Bob's new book of, fiction for adults this time. And I thought, actually, to start, I'd be really interested in asking, as someone who's now written cricket fiction for sort of both adults and for for kids, cricket has this incredible heritage of like non-fiction. We have amazing cricket journalists, amazing cricket writers in that area. Why do you think there's so little cricket fiction in comparison that people don't seem to do it as well?
I don't know. I'm really disappointed today because people like Conan Doyle and P.G. Wodehouse used to write fiction about cricket, and there was plenty of boys' own stuff in the 30s. And somehow it seems to have petered out. And I think that's really why I wrote Glory Gardens, because there wasn't anything around at all, fiction for kids. So I wrote a couple of books, and somehow they got published. I mean, it was, I don't know what. My publishers took me on and said if I wrote 4 books, they'd publish me. So I took the challenge and wrote 4 of them.
Well, perhaps we can start with Glory Gardens and then move on to First 11. Do you get... I know with some authors they get to a stage where they sort of get... Are you still fond of Glory Gardens when people sort of talk to you about it, ask you about it, or are you kind of like, oh God, I wrote that ages ago, I'm sort of tired of it now?
No, I'm in 2 minds about Glory Gardens. One is they still live with me, and I still get fan letters. Because the great thing about kids' books is that kids are always there. So a new generation comes along and reads them. And even though they're probably a bit dated now, I mean, they didn't wear helmets in those days, and I mean, all sorts of peculiar things, which the game has changed completely for kids. But kids still love them. And I got a letter only yesterday from a guy who's at university who said he was just rereading Glory Gardens at the age of 21. And he said, I'm supposed to be reading Dante's Inferno, but I'm actually reading Glory Gardens. Have you got any tips how I can actually get off Glory Gardens and get
onto Dante's Inferno? Yeah. Well, I must, because I found them completely addictive as a child. And what I imagine, I guess I'd share with a lot of people who really fell for Glory Gardens, is they were an important part of me getting into cricket. So I was enjoying playing cricket and then reading the books, and they brought across this whole idea of how exciting it was to be in a team, the adventure, and also how I guess cricket. Because you say you wonder if the books are dated, and one thing I find really interesting is that. So I was an English teacher for a bit, and I feel like a lot of young adult fiction now deals with kind of everything has to be relentlessly like grim and miserable. And what I found about Glory Gardens that I really, really like is that it was difficult. Like the team was always having controversy and difficult, but there was always sort of a nice optimism to it. There was a kind of cheering thing to the books always.
Well, it reflected the team I was playing with at the time, and a lot of the things. And I was captain of them for a short time, so hooker sort of brought out an awful lot of my anxieties as a captain of Reigate Pilgrims down
okay.
Would you mind, sorry Andy, could you explain for those listeners that don't know what Glory Gardens is, what the basis of the series is, please?
Well, basically it's a team that gets together on a recreation ground, and young kids, and they form their own team, and they're not a club side or not part of a club side, and they're not a school team. So they do it themselves, so they do co-opt their school teacher as a trainer. But apart from that, everything is done themselves. So the kids are in control, and it's all about the kids making decisions and relationships between them. And they begin as the worst team in the world, and by book 8, they win the Ashes against a young Australian side. So it's a sort of boys' own adventure story, but it really is about the personalities of kids playing off against each other. I mean, there's a character called Clive, who I think is a sort of KP character.
Yes, yeah.
Before his time.
Yeah. Brilliant. And that's sort of Hooker's job, isn't it? It's great at managing these personalities. Because I think one thing the book does is it makes cricket captaincy incredibly incredibly exciting, because you're, as you say, the kids have all the power in the book. They're sort of making all these decisions. And you also, one thing, was it quite a conscious decision that you have Obert, who is like a recurrent character of throughout, So you tolerate basically a very bad cricketer who's brought along. Was that kind of quite a conscious decision to say this wasn't just about, because a lot of them are brilliant, aren't they? But you wanted to show that this team can.
A lot of them turned out to be brilliant. I mean, Azzy, the Pakistani lad, is brilliant, and Clive, West Indian descent. He's a wonderful left-handed bat. He's kind of based on Gary Sobers. But no, Obed is there to sort of play everyone off, to irritate, but also to sort of show the human side of people, that they will tolerate someone who's not as good as them. Yeah. And of course, he also brings off the coups and games.
Yes,
by accident.
yeah. Because did you write it? Was there a sense of? Did you see it as part of a mission to get more young people into cricket as well? Was that part of it, or was that just a kind of secondary benefit?
Well, I got very involved with Chance to Shine when it kicked off, and I was very keen on what they were doing. In fact, one of my books, I gave the royalties to Chance to Shine. But yeah, no, I thought there wasn't at that time. Cricket wasn't mainstream, and we were basically losing so many Test matches around that time. The 90s weren't a great time for English cricket. But also, I'd seen the enthusiasm in the West Indies at that time as well. I'd been out to the West Indies and played, took a team out to the West Indies.
How did you decide to pitch it in terms of the level of detail you went into about cricket in Glory Gardens? Because one thing I really, really enjoyed about it reading as a kid is that you didn't dumb it down. You know, you did talk about... for someone who was getting into the complexity of the game, you know, the different types of bowling, different batting, how did you decide on pitching it to sort of get the right level to not put people off, but also reward people getting into it?
I suppose there's a little bit of a didact in me, and I wanted them to learn about how to bowl a leg break.
Yes.
So there are all the little diagrams and stuff like that in there. So I was quite keen that it was definitely pitched at Cricket Mad.
The scorecards were the other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, that was the clincher. A fiction book with scorecards at that age was sort of absolutely decisive.
Well, that also went back to the fact that I was a sort of bit of a nerd as a child, and I mean, I spent a lot of time with my friends playing Ours That.
Oh, yes, yeah. Oh.
And tell me, Bob, did you know, as another keen cricketer who's actually an Oxford Blue, only because he came on as a replacement wicket keeper once for Oxford, Bob Trevelyan said to me that at one point as a child he could name every single county cricketer. Do you think you could have?
No. I could name every single Yorkshire cricketer.
Right.
I lived in Cambridgeshire, Wisbech in Cambridgeshire, and there wasn't a local side. So I became obsessed with the most unlikely cricketer, a man called Doug Paget. And I just sort of, and there was a winning side at the time. Yorkshire were winning, and Boycott had just come into the side, and but Paget was my man, and Johnny Wardle in my youth. I mean, I did start. I think the first Test match I remember was the 55 Ashes win, and I had the Sky Casket cassette. Not cassette. It's a great big radio stuck under the bed covers. I listened to Tyson blowing away the Australians, and that was the beginning, you know.
And Reg Simpson with his trousers tucked into his socks.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff.
That just actually, I don't know if I can just butt in on this subject. I was thinking overnight, you know, we heard about the death of Tom Graven, and I was thinking, well, none of us have obviously seen him play. Do you get to see Graven play?
Yeah, I saw him score 100 at Trent Bridge.
Oh, really?
It was absolutely the most wonderful innings I've ever seen.
He was as elegant as they say.
Against the West Indies, it was a wonderful innings.
Oh,
absolutely brilliant. But yeah, I mean, fiction in cricket is I don't know. There's still no one doing it, and it's I think it's bizarre. It's I mean, obviously there are books like Netherlands by Joseph O'Neill, and but you know, it creeps in certain books, but it's still desperately lacking, I think.
Yeah.
Could I, Andy, just again butt in and say a favourite here at Guerrilla Cricket? We all obviously love Netherlands, but a favourite here has to be Chinaman.
Yeah.
I mean, it's arguable whether it's more about boozing and dying than it is about cricket. But what did you think of that?
It's a lovely book. I mean, you asked me to put together my 11 favourite books. It didn't quite creep in, but
right.
The Rainman did. And
Save it for later. Sorry, Andy, over to you.
Yeah. No, well, I think just to touch it, I think it's really interesting contrast these sort of Netherlands and China, because I mean, Netherlands, I do get why people enjoy it, but I don't think it's really a cricket book. I think it's a book about the immigrant experience where cricket plays like a minor role. And I think what's much braver actually about something like Chinaman and actually getting to First 11 is actually to write a book that is actually about cricket and exploring the complexity and interesting about cricket. You said actually during the lunch break, it was funny, as a nice lead-in, you said, well, cricket's always been political. And one thing I really got reading these stories is it's actually a very political book. I mean, you cover the repression of the Aborigines, fallout of the Sri Lanka tsunami. You have a socialist streaker, which came as something of a surprise. The impact of poverty on a young Indian screen. Was that did that just come out almost accidentally as you chose subjects for the stories, or was there quite a conscious desire to explore some of these political ideas?
It must be. I mean, it's certainly a subconscious desire. I wrote the story. There's a story I wrote originally, was the Afghanistan story, which was based. When I first visited Pakistan, I walked along between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and I walked along the Kabul River. And the Kabul River was where all the refugee camps were, and they were playing cricket. Yeah. And I thought, and then of course the Afghanistan team came along, and I heard about this charity called Afghan Connection, which was building schools and cricket pitches in Afghanistan. And I wrote this story for them, and they put it on their website, and that really sort of kicked it all off. So I suppose the very first one was political.
Ah, so it did start with that. Because actually that's a sort of recurrent theme, isn't it, in the book, the cricket as a force for social change? Because you have that with the tsunamis. Did you have personal? Did that one come from personal experience?
I was in Sri Lanka for the Test series just before the year before the tsunami in 2003. Yeah. So I saw England playing Kandy and lose in Colombo, that was so that obviously had a huge impact. I travelled on the train to Galle a year before it was blown off the tracks, and so it had quite an impact on me.
Because that was another thing. It's interesting. You said the experience of Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, because you structure the book around all sort of lots of different cricket playing nations. So there seems to be part of the book is just paying tribute to a lot of these countries. And
it's kind of paying tribute. I mean, I haven't. It probably shows in the book. I've never been to Australia, New Zealand, or South Africa. Funnily enough, the sort of the dominant nations, white nations, as if you like. But I've been to all the other cricket-playing countries, including Afghanistan, and I just have this feeling that cricket has changed the relationship between the empire, the Britain and the Commonwealth, Britain and its first world colonies. There's a wonderful chapter in Author's 11, which I read recently about this sort of the attitude of the English towards its colonies and how the colonies sort of turn it on their head, how it's turned on its head by the West Indies and India, and cricket becomes a force for social cohesion.
And you're almost dealing with very different takes on the same sport. And I think it's one thing that comes across quite strongly in the book when you're reading, for example, the Afghanistan chapter. It's cricket, but it's cricket with very much an Afghan angle based on their very much unique experience.
Yes, well, I mean, there are issues around cricket in Afghanistan which are very difficult, and I touch on women's cricket.
So that was exactly what I wanted to get onto, actually, because it was one thing coming back to Glory Gardens that I remember one of the most striking things about that was Erica, the fact that you had a girl playing and holding her own in a mostly boys sport. And it's one thing that's really striking about this book, that you have lots and lots of female leads. So you have the scorer in the final story is a girl. You've got the blind Australian cricketer in the very first story is female. Is that sort of quite a passion of yours, raising the profile of sort of women's involvement in cricket?
No, I just think it's I played cricket alongside girls, women, and funnily enough, when I met Charlotte Edwards, I discovered that she actually played against my old cricket team, because she played for Ramsey near Chatteris in East Anglia, and I come from Wisbech. And so she actually played in the boys' side until she was 16 or something like that, and benefited a lot from playing. And interestingly, a lot of the women cricketers now are beginning to, one of them...
Sarah Taylor is now,
Taylor's
yeah,
right.
because she's playing grade cricket in Australia right now. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. So one thing is, obviously, some of the stories are have got sort of quite an uplifting, but there are a couple that I guess took me by surprise by, I guess, how dark they were. And in particular, there was one of the story covers a batsman, or cricketer, contemplating suicide and having that as an issue. And there's obviously been quite a lot written in cricket, particularly David Frith's book, about the idea that cricketers may be more prone to that.
One of my top 11. By the way.
Really? All right. And I wonder, was that sort of in your... is that what you wanted to explore in that story? Because, I mean, I found that very gripping, that idea of... I guess I find it really interesting, this idea of whether some sportsmen in a particular sport would be more sensitive to depression and suicide than others.
Well, I'm not a depressive person myself, particularly. I mean, I have moods, ups and downs, but I was particularly moved by Johnny Bairstow's dad's suicide. I thought that had a very strong impact on me, and I know full well. I mean, obviously, reading the David Frith book, that suicide is a big thing amongst ex-cricketers. A higher rate of suicides than most other sports professions. So it's an interesting
issue too.
it's an interesting side of cricket, I think. As is the obsessiveness of cricket. I mean, I think that's something which has always interested me. The ability for someone like Cook to bat for long periods of time has always fascinated me. But it means going to a part of the mind which is perhaps not explored by. There was a line I read. It was actually about umpires. I think it was Cardus who wrote it, who said that everyone in Britain had the concentration and ability to focus that an umpire has in a game of cricket. Good umpire has in a game of cricket, we would be way ahead the top nation. It was that sort of idea of concentration which cricket brings.
Do you think it's a skill that you can learn, or when you reference someone like Alistair Cook, do you think that's just one of those things that he was blessed with, he's always been able to do that, or do you think that sort of level of obsessive concentration is a skill that can be taught?
Well, I explore it a little bit in one of the stories, the New Zealand story of getting 100, of the sort of mindset that you can possibly learn a little bit.
I was going to ask, is the stream of consciousness in that story, is that based on personal experience? Because I found that really interesting, the way, going through... I don't think I've actually read a similar thing, really, of actually going through the batsman's thinking process before deliveries as he's getting close to the hundreds. Where was sort of the inspiration for that?
I don't know. I never scored 100. I was a left-arm spin bowler mainly, but I did get a few 50s. But I never went on to get 100, so I guess... And I've read stuff by people like Brearley and so on about the sort of mindset of the batsman when he's concentrating. So I just thought it was an interesting subject to pursue.
Yesterday we had Professor David Papineau on the show, who's written a lot about the activity of the brain when a batsman faces a ball, particularly the fact that he reckons that it's... the ball moves too fast for the brain to appreciate what the eye has seen, and a lot of the hitting is actually instinct. And so there's a theory, I'm not sure whether it's his, that when people say, oh, he's losing his eyes, it's actually that a batsman is becoming older, and it's more that their powers of concentration might be waning. And I certainly think there might be something in this. I remember when I was very young and I just read the Rachel papers, probably not as young, shamefully, as Martin Amis was when he wrote it. it. But Amos was interviewed, and he said, "Oh my goodness, if only I had the work, the speed, the ability to write a book as quickly as I did just after I'd left university. But of course, I was used to working and churning out stuff so much more than I am now when I'm drinking or playing tennis or whatever he's doing." And so, I wonder if concentration is one of those things that it can be taught up to a point, but it's also to do with age.
Yeah, I'm sure it's to do with age. I think concentration spans are much stronger in younger people. Although, of course, there's always the sort of Gower boycott debate of whether concentration is what. I mean, obviously, David Gower was capable of great concentration, but he was also capable of sort of giving it away, as it were, whereas boycott would just plough on forever and ever and ever, and would be furious with himself if he got out through lack of concentration.
Yeah, and thank goodness that we have all of those different personalities in a team. I'm thinking of another sport. I'm sure there are loads. It's just that golf would be one, but it's just that I'm not that interested in them. But I'm a big snooker fan, and that's a lot to do with concentration, isn't it? Hendry said so, and I think that I suppose the Ronnie O'Sullivan example, although I don't think that David Gower suffers from the blues like Ronnie does, but Colin Hendry definitely said that it was age, which meant that he couldn't win as much as he had done previously. And with Ronnie, it's just whether he's interested or not, isn't it? That's how he focuses when he's kind of entertained by his own play or the play of his opponent.
Yeah, I'm sure that's. But I mean, it's the way that concentration sort of blots out everything except for the moment. I mean, I think concentration is in cricket. As a bowler, it's a very interesting. You make up your mind what you're going to bowl, but then there can be a sort of split moment in the run up to the wicket where you think, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something different, and then you concentrate on the different, and sometimes that is the best ball you bowl. It's a curious playing with your own mind.
Yeah, because you actually in the Sri Lanka story, you have this wonder spinner, and you also talk through the thinking process of bowling an over, coming up with a plan. But as you say, also during that story, he adapts the plan based on. So, and again, that was very much personal experience of bowling his left arm.
Yes,
yeah.
I mean that was put in the. I believe it was put in the mouth of Murali.
Murali, yes, yeah. Do you find? In terms, I guess, following just the conversation we just had, do you find one mindset more fascinating than the other? I mean, is it more interesting writing about the challenges of being in tribulations of being a batsman or a bowler, or are they just sort of similarly interesting?
I think they're very tied up with each other. I mean, I've always thought that adage, bowl in the ball that he least wants, or is important. I used to play cricket, I was never very good, but I used to play cricket against a team called the Economicals, which was the London School of Economics old boys side. And there's a guy called David Kynaston, who's historian, played for them. And David wasn't a very good cricketer either, but he had a wonderful cut shot. So the answer was, we all decided just to play for his cut shot, and we had a sort of ring of fielders on the offside, and he either sort of scored 4 or got caught, so playing to, I mean, that's an extreme example, but you usually look at the person you're bowling at, but I was very lucky if I got the ball to bounce where I wanted it to.
Yeah. Did you? Because I was trying to think, going through the stories, and I was also trying to think back to Glory Garden, whether more of your most heroic characters and heroic moments are more bowlers or batsmen. Did you ever have a balance in that generally the most dramatic moments were acts of brilliant batting or acts of brilliant bowling?
I guess what I love to watch, I mean, watching bowlers bowl on this surface in quite trying conditions is interesting, fascinating, but it's not like watching the West Indian four ping them down in the 90s. But watching a batter score a beautiful 100 is still the greatest joy. I think.
The pinnacle.
Yeah.
And I guess the other question I was sort of interested in is you've written on football as well, so for kids as well. And did you find there are things you could explore? Were you exploring sort of similar ideas, or does football allow you to do something kind of completely different that you haven't?
I think the football series I wrote were a bit Roy the Rovers, a bit sort of responding to a publisher's request rather than... and I did them in conjunction with a friend who'd been asked to produce these books by Penguin. And in fact it was Deutsche in the end that published them. And we wrote them in tandem, so he wrote a chapter and I wrote a chapter.
Oh, right.
And when, his knowledge of football was even worse than mine. so I was constantly having to correct. I'm an Aston Villa supporter, by the way. So
my sister's a Villa fan.
I can hardly talk about football at the moment.
Oh yes, remember the Martin O'Neill days? Well, I'm sure there are even better ones, but I remember as when I was younger that it was just glorious when he was manager, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah,
it was good. Yeah, they'll come back, but I think they'll go down.
Where's the balance in your passions? Is it much more cricket, or?
Oh yes, cricket is the be all and end all.
Yeah. No, I think it was interesting as well. I guess just sort of going back, that difference between the batsmen and the bowlers. You seem to have a particular. There are quite a lot of that particular passage in the Sri Lanka story about the sort of magical spinner, the sort of improbable playing deliveries that you just can't understand where they've come from. And I guess at times it's the idea that cricket can actually be almost a bit magical, a bit mystical. There are things that happen in the game that kind of defy description. Would that be sort of fair?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think watching a batter like Inzamam or Huck play, for instance, the sort of sheer magic of his wrist actions and some of the shots he played. And spin obviously is an extraordinary. It's in an extraordinary state of development.
Yes. We're hoping to have Justin Parkinson on the show, who's just written a book about leg spin and talks about the days when, I think, was it Middlesex had 5 leg spinners?
Really?
Yeah, and said, I think it's called the death of English leg spin, but maybe for not much longer.
Well, maybe not. Although at the moment there's a pretty dearth of English spinners altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wonder. Monty Panesar at his peak would have been quite interesting on out here at the moment.
That's I think the Monty story is an incredibly sad one. I mean, in terms of the dearth of spinners, and in terms of also you talking about your interest in Chance to Shine, I guess. I mean, do you think there's a lot more that could be done in terms of the promotion of cricket? I mean, I think Glory Gardens must surely. I mean, I said when I was a teacher. I mean, we had all the sets of Glory Gardens with the very funky new covers. Because the ones I own are sort of really old, they've now got these quite snazzy, new snazzy covers. And I thought, I mean, Glory Gardens could play a really useful role in actually promoting it. But I mean, do you think there's more that can be done to just get more kids playing the game?
Well, I think quite a lot has been done in terms of bringing kids into the game. I remember when I played cricket at school, there were 3 good cricketers and the rest of us stood on the boundary and did bugger all. I mean, we you didn't get a love of the game from that.
No.
But I think nowadays everyone in the side is drawn in. I mean, that's the great thing about 2020 and the way they play indoor cricket as well, which is. I mean, I've watched some of the street Chance to Shine or street stuff played in big. There's a big sports hall down in Canary Wharf. where a lot of games go on. It's absolutely fascinating watching.
You know what's so funny is that Andy keeps asking you about how your books could spread the love of cricket, and said that he read the books and then he really got into cricket, or that his love for cricket was consolidated by reading the Glory Gardens set. I have a very different anecdotal experience, which is that my nephew Pip, who goes to a school where really he's been exposed to lots of amazing literature and is encouraged to read better than you imagine most boys at school are, because he's at Westminster Under School. His parents could not get him to read a book. I mean, he was just, and still is actually, pretty averse. Then his grandmother, my mother, found Glory Gardens because she was a bit like, come on, let's look at this situation. Let's just get something cricket related. And he went through them like a hot knife through butter. So I'm sure as many children that might be introduced to cricket through their books, there are also kids that might be introduced to good literature through them.
Reading.
Yeah.
Well, that's a sort of, you have to do a sort of leap of faith to imagine you'll go straight from Glory Gardens to good literature. But nevertheless, I've had a lot of letters from mums saying, or from mums and dads saying they got their kids to read through Glory Gardens. I've actually decided, because I kind of self-published this collection of short stories with a friend of mine, a man called Stephen Chalk, who publishes Fairfield Books down in Bath, and he helped me to publish these short stories and distributed them for me. But it's kind of self-publishing, and I've decided that after 20 years, I'm going at last to write another Glory Gardens.
Oh my goodness! Is this an exclusive, Bob?
It isn't exclusive.
Oh, this is so marvelous.
So will this be a continuation, or will this be Glory Gardens growing up, or what?
No, this will be a continuation. I decided I couldn't bear them to grow up. I really couldn't.
Right.
I'm very Peter Pan-like about them. But no, I think they're going to go to Australia.
Brilliant.
I think they've got to go to Australia. So it'll be. I think it's going to be. Shall I give you the title?
Oh yes! Gosh, Hendo, have you got this? We've got an exclusive. Go for it.
I think it's going to be called Return to Glory. And
have you got goosebumps, Andy?
I'll get my pre-order in now. But,
Can I also put in a request? I know much once more is is appropriate in this instance. But what age do you think of when you write the Glory Gardens books? I want to be clear because I kept saying on Twitter for a sort of 10-year-old. Is that right, or a bit old or young?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think of myself. I mean, presumably it's the child in me that's writing them. I think of myself being about 8 or 9,
right?
When I'm writing the stories, but then you have to be a bit older because they're doing things which 8 and 9-year-olds couldn't possibly do.
Right.
I mean, sort of travelling all around the world on their own and stuff like that, with very few chaperones. It's there are things that Glory Gardens get up to which probably would be frowned upon in these more restricted politically correct times.
Forget that.
Because they have been on tour once before, haven't they? Been on tour to the West Indies.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually there is. Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed that. I remember that book as being quite an exciting, getting them out of their comfort zone and into the new. So I guess that'd be the opportunity.
I did a tour to the West Indies myself.
So, Bob, is this an excuse, actually? Is this a ruse to basically go to Australia for the first time and put it on expenses?
I think I kind of will have to go.
Yeah,
to
I think you should. Yes. Well, what I was going to do is put in a request that Pip is now 13, and I have no idea what teenage fiction is like. There's isn't Twilight and the Hunger Games? Isn't that all teenage fiction?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is that a lot of very new teenage fiction feels the need to be really like current on things. Like it has to kind of see itself as a work of like drug education or whatever.
Right.
And what they don't realise is that a lot of actually teenagers really do not wish to be lectured to about these things that they're already being lectured to about in lots of other avenues of their life. I don't know. I find a lot of it's quite underwhelming.
Let me put in a word for your. I mean, I had a godson, Sam Sheringham, who's now working for the BBC sports. He's cricket correspondent. In fact, he's just produced Stumped, the World Service thing for the BBC. He was 9 when I wrote the first Glory Gardens book, and I pushed it past him. I said, "Sam, you've got to read this before I can send it out." And I got back things from Sam saying, "I don't think a 9-year-old would say this, Bob."
Right, how fantastic! So does he now have a son that you can, or daughter that you can pass things by?
His son's a bit young
Right.
still. I mean, Jack is only 5, I think, so he's a bit young for it. So I'm going to have to find someone else to push the new book past.
Well, I would like to volunteer. Not, I'm afraid, for Return to Glory.
You might be a bit old for that.
Yes, but no, I would like to volunteer my nephew for subbing or test reading or whatever you call it, a teenage fiction book. I think that in the next session, this is terribly rude and pressurizing, Bob, but I'm going to ask Twitter to come up with ideas for a cricket book for 16-year-olds, because then that gives you 2.5 years to write it for Pip. And, your Glory Gardens has been really, really important part of his pastoral care. And if I thought that you could also take care of him as a 16-year-old, I would feel a lot happier and sleep better at night. So please consider it and tweet us. Think of a name for a series and some inspiring ideas.
The other thing I'd love someone to do one day to the Glory Gardens trilogy, not trilogy, the Glory Gardens series, that I wonder if you'd ever be up for someone doing, is to do graphic novels of them. So just lots more.
I couldn't do a graphic novel, but I think graphic novels are wonderful for that age. I think they're brilliant. There's a little bit of the illustrations in.
They're fantastic. Yeah.
In not in Glory Gardens, but in Bowl Like the Devil.
Okay.
Are a little bit sort of graphic novelish in their style, a little bit mangerish.
I could see that it's the last ad break before the players come back out. So I want to be really clear on this. I'd like you, Andy, to spell Bob's surname so that people have that. Give the exact title, and if you would, the ISBN number of his new book. That's Adult Fiction on Cricket. And then do you know the ISBN number off by heart for any of Glory Gardens?
Certainly not.
Okay, so go to Glory Gardens.
I'll tell you what, though, I bought along 6 copies of First 11 if you want to distribute them to anyone for whatever reason, being the first person to, I don't know, guess the score at tea time or something.
That is absolutely fantastic. Or come up with the name for your new series for teenagers, Bob. Perhaps they'll get...
No pressure there.
No.
Well, we've been discussing, an awful lot over lunch, but we've been discussing particularly Bob Cattell's new book, First 11 Stories of the World of Cricket. So it's Bob Cattell, Cattell, and the book is called First 11. I don't know where I find an ISBN number.
Let me see. I think it's here. It is... I better put my specs on. Hang on a sec. All right, quickly before the players come out. ISBN, have you got pens? 978-0-956-8510-5-5. One more time. 978-0-956-8510-5-5. And my goodness, Andy, as he exits to work, he's such a fan, Bob, that he agreed to come in early before work and also read this in a week. You've done a great job, and Bob, that was absolutely fascinating. I hope that you'll stay for some cricket and perhaps do some commentary at some point.
I'll never recognise the players, that's my trouble. But,
right. Well, certainly expert summarise, if you would. I'm just going to say bye to Andy and Hendo, over to you to introduce the afternoon session.